Afrifachi. I am a Black African woman. I have straight brown shoulder length hair. My background is blurred, so you can't see my background, but I'm wearing a cobalt blue jacket and I have a black t-shirt on. My pronouns are she, her, hers. What else am I supposed to say? Sorry, I keep forgetting what the list is.
What you do?
Yeah. Pardon?
What you do?
Oh, yeah, that'd be helpful, wouldn't it? Sorry, apologies. Yes, so I am, well, I wear two hats. My day job, I work for Norwegian Refugee Council. I am the global advisor, specialist advisor on all things to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I also own my own, well, I have my own consultancy called the Inclusion Agilist. And I'm the founder of that. And again, that is more about workplace culture and inclusion, look at the lens from inclusion and also well-being as well. Yeah, that's me.
I can hop on. Hi everyone, my name is Chisom Udeze. I am a Black woman, brown skin, twists on my hair, with long twists, with whitish highlights and also some blonde highlights as well. I'm wearing a button down or up shirt with a collar and very colorful necklace. My surrounding, my wall, my background is also blurred, but you can see it's kind of an off-whitish, off-gray wall I'm sitting in front of. A bit about me, I am an economist, and I'm also the founder of Diversify. So I am very much excited about all things diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Sorry, I was on mute. Mary, do you want to continue?
Can you hear me now? I can't believe I've been on mute the whole time speaking about jollof. Anyway, actually I wasn't on mute, but anyway, my name is Mary Wawero and I am a Kenyan woman. I am African, obviously. I am Black. My skin is black. My afro is popping. I'm wearing an afro. And my dress is a jungle green, is it? And there's some print on the sides. I think it's cream. And behind me is a wall, and it's white. And there's a there's a picture up there where an African girl is milking an animal, and I believe it's a goat, because it's not a cow. Yeah. So yeah, I am a DEI consultant. I also do social impact work and anti-racism work. So I train and consult in these areas. My company is called Crest Impact. It's very new. I established it in early April. And besides that, I've been working as a global project manager in content maintenance. And I'm really happy to be here. Being African, obviously, this is a very important topic for me. Living in Finland, because I live in Finland, which is a white majority country. So I am a citizen of Finland, but before anything, I am Kenyan. So I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so sorry, I couldn't find the screen. I was mute. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Our topic of discussion today is anti-Blackness. And before we delve deeper into this topic, I would like to begin with a definition of what anti-Blackness is. So anti-Blackness is a specific kind of racial prejudice directed towards people of African descent or those perceived to be Black. It is the inability to recognize Black humanity and manifests in the systemic, structural, workplace, societal, and interpersonal marginalization of Black people. Anti-Blackness, it can be perpetuated by people of any ethnicity or racial background, including within Black communities, The action of anti-Blackness can be conscious or unconscious and can be internalized by Black people. So moving on to the questions. In your introductions, you all pointed out that you all are from different countries. We also had a small battle about the rice in the different countries. So I assume that your experiences are quite varied too. And during our prep call, Chisom, you mentioned that part of anti-Blackness is the idea that Blackness is a homogeneous experience, that all Black people experience it in the same way, which is not the case. I want to start by asking you, from your personal experiences as Black women, what is anti-Blackness? And what does anti-Blackness mean to each one of you? And if you've had any experience with it. So just start with what anti-Blackness is to all of you.
I can start trying to collect my thoughts here. I think perhaps it's worth also maybe stating that for me, my experience of Blackness or anti-Blackness has been within social constructs and systems, usually in the West. But it's also worth mentioning as well that, and I don't know how it is for Amma or perhaps Mary, but I always was raised and told you're Nigerian, you're African, even though I was, in the US or elsewhere in the world. And I was never quite defined as Black. And that definition is something that I have embraced in the past in over a decade now, in how the world interacts with me and how I interact with the world. So for me, if I look at Blackness, I think of Earth, I think of the African continent, I think about, like my ancestors and glory. Like for me, it's something just like absolutely beautiful. I think, and there's something quite unique about how that is framed, at least from the context in which I know it to be, say from the African context or from the Nigerian context. Now, anti-Blackness, in the way I've seen it unfold, is people experiencing harm, discrimination, biases, just on the basis of their skin color. How people assume they know who you are based on how you look. And we can tie this very closely to racism, but I think what is quite unique about anti-Blackness is that it permeates, like it is present in different spaces. And this presence is, on a good day, is harmful and hurts your feeling. On a bad day, you might be dead, right? So I think that I've seen anti-Blackness show up in the way people are policed, in the way people are believed, in the opportunities people have, in the doors they can get into, and the ones that are shut in front of them. I think it shows up in how I'm supposed to wear my hair and what is professional. It shows up in how I'm supposed to speak and what is acceptable. It shows up in how I have to manage the world around me, because for me, sometimes existing in my skin means that I have to put on an armor every single time I step out of my house to protect myself, not necessarily because I am anticipating it, but I know that not being prepared is more harmful than being somewhat prepared, because something will happen. It's just a matter of when. That is my experience of how I interact with it and how I tend to manage my world for my sanity and self-care, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, 100%. I echo with a lot of things you've said, and I think, there is differences in experience. I think we are not all the same, and I think we'll come and talk about this a bit later, but I do feel that out of sheer laziness, or just because people don't want to be bothered, they lump people of color and Black people into one thing. If we even look at the label, which was used for such a long time, BAME, it was just to put everybody into the same category, in the same label, where actually the experiences of Black people, brown people, people of the global majority are very different. My experiences will be very different, or even sometimes similar to all three of us sitting here, or four of us. It just comes into context. And I think for me, anti-Blackness is very much about devaluing people who are Black in any shape and form. And what we have to be really careful about here is that whenever we talk about racism, we always talk about white supremacy, because that is where it stems from. I'm sure we'll go on to talk about colonialism and all that stuff. But when we're talking about anti-Black, people of color, including brown people, can be anti-Black too. And for me, growing up, I never had to think about the color of my skin. I was born in Ghana. Most of our lives, I lived in Ghana and Kenya. And then we moved to London when I was 9. And I think my first encounter about my skin was when I was 9, and I'll come to share the story later on. But I think I'm echoing everything Chisom said, and it's really, there's nothing further for me to add in that. For me, it's about devaluing people, and it is about when you talk about how you assume how someone is supposed to be. And I don't have enough time, so I'll give a quick example. Yesterday, we were getting a flight from Oslo to London, and the gate was closed. The boarding part. Sorry, I'm losing I can't remember where you basically get your tickets from was closed. So we wanted to check in our pram because we have children, and I asked the lady, who was a brown skinned lady. I asked her what time the gate opened, and she said the booking. She said 10 minutes. We were standing there getting ourselves together. Then another person of her skin color came along, and she attended Tim. Obviously, I was very annoyed by this. So I went to her and said, sorry, we were here first, and I asked you. Then she intimidated to say that he was from business class. And I said to her, my question was, so what, Black people don't fly business class? And then she was stunned. And I was like, you have just made an assumption that I'm not able to fly business class. Well, actually, we are members of this airline, and we can stand in this queue. We were first here. Common courtesy would have asked you to say, are you ready, ma'am? Or do you need assistance? Because you can see my husband is trying to put away our buggy, or ask the gentleman, or even just ask me, is it okay for me to see to this gentleman first? But no, you assumed on 2 counters that A, one, because of my skin color, that I surely would not be flying business class, and B, you didn't answer the question. And some people might say that I'm being a bit out of order, but I don't go there unless I know that there is something inclined in that, because that's how I've been raised. I've never been raised to have my color and chip on my shoulder. I've been raised to be aware of my color in certain situations, but not because it's the Black card that I use first. And so when I asked for this lady's name, she obviously said no, because she knew she was in the wrong. That's just an example I want to say, and I don't want to run into things, but that was just as of yesterday, an experience of my Blackness, because someone made an assumption, because I was standing in a queue, that I was not going flying business class, because I also had family. So it can come in the smallest form of a microaggression to the biggest form, where actually your life is implicated. And yes, every day, if you don't have to wake up worrying about the color of your skin or how you fit into something, you're very privileged not to be having or have to face anti-Blackness. And I'll stop there and let Mary add to that.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to add to say, for people who are new to this, anti-Blackness is basically the attitudes, the beliefs, the behaviors, everything that works to discredit, devalue, like everyone else said, or to dismiss, or to mistreat, or to exclude Black people. And with exclusion, I mean everything. Economically excluding us from panels, excluding us from just asking our views about anything that concerns every other human being. So that's what anti-Blackness is. And anti-Blackness it's everywhere. It's like I said, it's even in your thoughts. And at some point, when you're having anti-Blackness in your thoughts, at some point it's going to come out, and you're going to say it, or you're going to do something or treat someone who's Black in a way that shows you are anti-Black. So it's not something that people can hide very well. Some can do it, but eventually it's going to come out. And growing up in Kenya, it's a Black majority country, but then we do have a colonial past. So some people may not know this, but we were colonized by the British, and then we had different classes. So if you are British or European, then you are a first-class citizen. If you are Asian, and specifically if you are from India or Pakistan or any other place, you are considered a second-class citizen. if you are an indigenous African person, so that means my parents, my parents' parents, all those people, then you are considered a third-class citizen. So if you are in a school where most people were Black, you may not have felt it, but when you left school, when you went out into the workforce, I have worked for an Indian business owner, and for example, we didn't use the same toilets. They had their own toilets, and luckily, my two sisters worked it was in Nairobi, in the city center. So two of my sisters worked very near me. So during lunch break, I would take my 15 or 20 minutes break, and then I would walk to my sisters and use the bathrooms there. So that's not something I knew as a child in school, but then I felt it and I experienced it as an adult. And also because I grew up, I went to a Catholic school. We had a lot of nuns and brothers coming from other countries, from Europe, coming to teach us. And I did know that there's a difference between a Black person and a white person because of that. We also had a church as well. And so I did know there was a difference, but it wasn't as pronounced as it is now as an adult living in Finland. So this is where I really, really feel it. This is where I see people doing things and totally disregarding me because I'm Black, or making assumptions about my intellect, or, just making assumptions that are anti-Black and racist. So that's been my experience.
May I add something quickly? Thanks, Mary. Something you said in terms of, I just want to nuance, because how anti-Blackness also shows up in communities of color, Black communities. I think there is such a thing of unconscious anti-Blackness. I think that everyone is capable of having this unconscious sentiment. I mean, of course, when you do the work, or when somebody calls it out, you might recognize it. But I think it is also possible that it is unconscious. So just wanted to add that it's not always known or in that way.
Yeah. True. And I'll add on to that and say that, especially with us who have grown up in formerly colonized countries, it's part and parcel of our lives. So anti-Blackness is in our communities. And because you are born into it, many times people don't even know it. So for example, with language, for example. So we speak English and Swahili in Kenya. Those are the national and official languages. But we also have our own languages, our mother tongues. Like mine is Kikuyu, which I'm fluent in. But then we have situations where you are more valued when you speak English, even though we are in Kenya. So, yeah.
It's an experience that I think happens all across Africa with that. And I think especially those that have been colonized, because the point is, there is unconscious bias, but there's also classical conditioning, which you are conditioned just because it's part of the system and structures you have been brought up in and raised in. And unless you have an opposite or different experience of that, that is all you'll ever know.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences. That brings me to my next question. In your opinion, is there a relationship between racism, anti-Blackness, and anti-Black racism? And if yes, what is the relationship between them? Let's start with Ama.
They're all intertwined, actually. I think the relationship between racism, anti-racism, and anti-Blackness, they all stream from the same thing. If we look at the definitions of racism and we look at it from the 4 quadrants of interpersonal, institutional, structural, and etc., the fact is that it stems from a majority group or a majority way of thinking that is actually enhancing everything that you do in the ecosystem. So, Mary mentioned social, economical, justice, everything. So when we actually debunk and actually break it down and look at it from the beginning of racism and how that all started off, there is a huge thing around, obviously, white supremacy, and everything that intertwines with that, with structures and systems that have been in place since the age of time that ultimately are for the majority group, which has often been the Caucasian group. And then when you then look at that from the personalities and you strip it down, when you then start to drill down into continents and regions and, you know, places that we talked about, colonialism and how that's impacted them, then you come to break those down. And ultimately, but if you look at the crux of it, the essence of racism is to make someone feel inferior. The essence of racism is about privilege. And I'm not talking about privilege just to do with wealth. We're talking about privilege to do with power and influence. And ultimately that then entails, so then if the narrative has always been that you have been devalued from the age of time, from slavery right until today, the present day, how that manifests is, even if you look at the race relations, whatever country you're in, from the UK to the US to, you know, to Western and even to Nordics, that is constructural from society. So how even we look at ourselves within our community, even with the Western community, even within the Ghanaian community, we're talking about skin color. When you look at it, and again, look at the historical context of what skin color was preferred, you know, the lighter the skin, the more privileges you had, the better the skin you had, the more opportunities you had. The darker you were then put to the workhouses to do work. The stronger you were, you'd always assess people. So then when you then look at that and then think about how that then relates to anti-racism and anti-Blackness, anti-racism is like the core of what actually racism is about. And then when you look at it from the individual groups and individual communities and ethnic groups from that, that's when you go into anti-Blackness, anti-brownness, you know, because ultimately it still loops in. I don't think you can individualize. You can individualize them because, like I say, the narrative and the stories are different, but they're all actually, there's an ecosystem of where they derive from. And if you look at the historical context of the past and how then when you look at now in terms of opportunities like Chisom mentioned and Mary mentioned, in terms of how it's deeply rooted in our societal being, from education right through to even when you're getting a house and who actually is able to buy a house, especially through financial wealth, you know, generational wealth and all that. It really does come into the context of that. And I mean, if you look at slavery, I'm going back to slavery, because it is the root of where we started, but it's not the core crux of this. You know, the reasons why, you know, Black people and African people were broken down was because they didn't want us to have the power. And obviously, if you break down and you disseminate and you really deconstruct a community at the crux of it and keep telling them that they are no good and devalue them, that's all they ever see until they see something better, or unless somebody wants to rise up to it. So yeah, for me, it's all intertwined, but they also have their own different lineages in terms of how they show up. And it's not necessarily always to do with slavery. That's my point.
Okay, thank you, Amma. Now, Mary, Chisom, do you all want to add something to this?
Yes, wanted to add to that. Thanks, Amma. Completely agree. Two new things I'd like to introduce to that is we need to understand that race is a construct. It's a social construct, and it's a concept that has been created, designed, that signifies or symbolizes, you know, the conflicts that people endure or the interests that people benefit from based on the body they wear. So here I'm talking about the human body, your skin color, how you present to the world. So if race is a construct, then we have to think about racism as a system. So racism is not necessarily that you as an individual, you're a bad person, or that you don't have good morals, or, you know, you're from the KKK clan. What it really just means is that it is a system, it is a structural reality, it is based on policies, on norms, on practices that oftentimes we have passively accepted because we have been conditioned to accept that this is the status quo, this is how things have ever been done, and this is how they will continue to be done. And these structures and opportunities manifest based on how we look and how we experience privilege or the lack thereof. I also think it's important to note that, at least for me, when I have conversations around race or racism or anti-Blackness, that what is being centered here, in my perspective, is not whiteness. What is being centered is the reality, and how can we address the reality, acknowledge the reality without centering whiteness, although whiteness and white supremacy is a part of it, but it goes beyond that, as we've been saying since we started, in how it also shows up in Black and brown communities and other communities of color as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chisom, for adding that. Mary, do you have something to add, or should I move on to the next question?
Now, I can add something quickly about that.
A quick add.
Yes, a very quick add. So racism is about power. And many times when we say racism, people always assume, okay, white, black, that's it. But racism is more than that. And this is why, for example, if you go, for example, to the Middle East, you're going to find Africans who work there, who are treated, who are actually slaves. So this is not a community or a region where you would say, these are white people. Depends on whom you're asking, but white people are not involved, but anti-Blackness is involved. And the way you're treating people. Then I go back to the country, to the example of my home country, Kenya. You do not need to have a white person in order to see anti-Blackness. You could see anti-Blackness between communities as well. And that's where tribalism comes in as well. Then you could also have, like the hierarchy I just mentioned, you could have a person of Asian origin in Kenya and an indigenous Kenyan who has black skin, dark skin, African ancestry. And there's no white person involved in that moment, but there could be anti-Blackness, and because of power. So who has the power in this situation? So that's how we look at it. But they're all interconnected. Like my colleague said, it's all interconnected. You cannot be able to always separate them.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I think as Black, brown, or people of color, there's usually always an instance when you become aware of your skin color. So Mary, my next question is for you. When was the first time you became aware of the color of your skin?
I think I first got aware of my skin color at the Catholic school. But then again, I cannot say that it was something that I really thought about because everyone else was Black. All the pupils were Black. Except for the nuns sometimes, or the fathers or the brothers. But yeah, I did know that, yeah, I'm a Black person and that's a white person, and I would know this is a Black person, that's a person of that's an Indian, for example, as we call people from who have Indian ancestry in Kenya. So they're Indian Kenyans, but I could tell. But it's not something that I would say affected me the way I'm affected now as an adult. So that's kind of the difference, but I could tell the difference.
Okay, thank you. Chisom, do you want to add to that? It would be interesting to hear all of your perspectives on this, actually.
Right. Sure. Let's see. So the question was, first time I was made aware of my skin color. I think it's important perhaps to differentiate between being made aware of my skin color and being made aware of my skin color, right? I think growing up with 3 older siblings that all have different shades of brown, like I obviously grew up knowing that, as my daughter defines it, which is, I think there's something quite beautiful when you hear kids define how we present. My daughter calls herself like, she's golden. And so for me, that's kind of how I think of like my sister, who presents more as quite light, as a light-skinned Black woman. So think about somebody like Beyonce. That's how my older sister presents. And then there are different shades of brown in my family, where my daughter would tell you that mommy is light brown chocolate, right? And then somebody else is like dark brown chocolate. And I think I've always known that within this construct, but being different shades was always something that was beautiful. Now, being made aware of my skin color, I think for me, honestly, I think was in maybe the late 2000s when I experienced harm, because that was when I understood that wearing the skin I have could potentially harm me, and actually not could potentially, does harm me. Right. So I think there's a difference there. But have I always known that I was a Black African woman? Absolutely. And I've been and always will be kind of like 100% proud in that. I think in the beginning we had a conversation about rice and, I'ma clarify that Nigerians have a thing, and that thing is real. You know, like there's this whole pride, and I love every bit of it in how I experience my my Blackness in that sense. But in how I experience it outside, sometimes it's harmful, and that has been, I think, in the late 2000s.
Yeah, I'm listening to both of you, and I can relate to both in different ways. I think for me, my family has my mother and my sister are definitely lighter to me. I think similar to, I guess, maybe a little bit lighter shade to Beyonce. My grandmother was very fair. She had blue eyes. You know, all the constructs. Like, and my dad is very dark, so I took my dad's skin shade. So my brother and I, again, different tones of beauty in my family. I think when I came to London, like I said, I came to London when I was 9. I went to primary school, and I think that's where I had my first experience of, I guess, racism, color perspective from one of my colleagues who actually became a friend of mine because she ultimately found out I lived next door. But anyway, that was my first experience. But as a kid, it was, she said something racial to me, and then she called me a pig, and I turned around and laughed. I said, well, you're more the shade of a pig than I am. You know, but that's kids just being kids at the same time. So, and I didn't, like I said, I was raised in a different way not to acknowledge my color of skin in that sense. But I think my first time was when I was in secondary school, because obviously I'm not saying that children don't, you know, have racist connotations or whatever it is, or aren't taught in a way where it's unconscious. But it was when I was in primary school, and it was because I was always being compared to, my sister always had different privileges to me because of the color of her skin and different preferences in terms of also being attractive, more attractive. So yeah, and also I think finally I'll add to that, being a mother, I also noticed that more so recently. So again, I'm a mother of two twin girls. And when one of them was, when we had the lady come in to weigh them, she was also, actually she was from Ghana. And I really felt sorry for this woman, because like we talked about the classical conditioning, every time she weighed my eldest twin, who's slightly fairer, she would always comment on the color of her skin and how beautiful she was. When she weighed my second twin, my youngest twin, she wouldn't say anything. To which I had to pull her aside and said, both my daughters have beautiful skin and richness in that. And if you keep saying that every time you come, you will not be allowed in my home again. And I had to tell her that, but I knew that she was, you know, it didn't click until I told her, and she apologized. But it's these nuances that we place so much emphasis, and also up until recently, you know, the lighter the skin color, the better the opportunities are. And we see it in media, we see it in consumer, everything we buy, look, feel, and touch. It's only recently, since George Floyd's murder, that things have suddenly been different. And, you know, you're seeing a lot more multiculturalism on the screen. But yeah, so those are my two experiences. And I think I was deeply hurt more so as a teenager, because obviously I'm trying to find myself, and being really attuned to my skin color of who I am, and that never defined, well, I mean, it defined me in a different way, was very upsetting. And I don't want my daughters to ever go through that if I can help it.
Can I ask, thanks for sharing, Amma. Can I ask Shayantani, like, what is your experience of, I mean, you're Indian, but you also present with a darker brown skin. What is your experience, or when did you realize that you had a color?
I think for me, I was made aware twice in my life. I would say one, I mean, growing up, when you're growing up in India and you're any shade of brown, you're made aware of it since childhood. So even if it's not your immediate family, you know, like people, it could be some auntie on the street calling you out and saying that, oh, why are you out in the sun? You're already so dark. It could be that. And so I think I was aware since childhood, but I also grew up with like two friends who were, one of them was lighter skinned, and one was she was darker skinned than me. So I could see it in the difference of how people treated all of us. So I was very aware of that. But I also grew up with a father who always told me "Kalo jogote ralo," which in Bengali, which in English means "black is the light of the world." So it didn't quite it didn't quite affect me. If people said anything, I could ignore it, and it didn't really like pierce into my heart. But also, having said that, there are people in India who are a lot darker than me, and if you ask this question to them, you know, they would have a different answer, because I have more proximity to whiteness than they do, so they could probably have a different answer. But the second time I was made aware was, I think, just moving to another country, and then you are so aware of how brown or black you are, like it's, it's the second glance you get on the train, or the opportunities or the jobs you don't get, and you're very, very aware of your skin color when these things happen. So I think that would be my experience.
Can I ask you a question? Because I find it so interesting. Something just came to my mind, and I'm trying to compare Africa and India, for example, because it's the same thing in Africa, where if you have lighter skin, then people comment, they comment about it and tell you, oh, you look really nice. At least you're not too dark skinned. They do make such comments, which are very harmful. One thing I've noticed in African countries is that this is mostly said to women. Yeah. And I'm trying to understand whether, do you all think the same thing? Is it the same thing in India, where it's where as a woman, you're the one who's expected to look a certain way? There's more pressure on you to be lighter skinned, don't stay in the sun too long. Is it the same thing?
Yes, it's colorism is very, very gendered in India. Not to say that no man experiences it, but it's completely different, because you have to be marriageable, So the darker you are, the less marriageable you are. A lot of people think that. So my brother is a lot darker than me, and I am sure nobody's ever told him that, oh, don't go out into the sun, and my mom and dad never told me that, but I've definitely heard that from somebody, So
and they actually do that. I've noticed they do that also with commercials in European countries. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when they have commercials where they have animations or anything like that, and they have a couple, and they're genderized, there's a man, there's a woman. Usually the woman is the one with the lighter skin. Even with chocolate, I've seen it, where they have a commercial where the bar, it's a cartoon or something, an animation, but the white one, it's normally pure white, is usually the woman. Then the darker chocolate is the man.
Patriarchy is alive and well.
Sorry?
Say it again?
I said patriarchy is alive and well in all contexts.
But I find that quite interesting, though, because my experience in the UK, I've kind of predominantly grown up in the UK, if you're a mixed race man, you have more to pick from, because it's really weird. The assimilation is that you are obviously, yes, I do think it's genderized, and I do think that men who are darker don't get the same necessarily all the time. But I would be very interested to ask men this question, because I have seen this where lighter skinned men or mixed race men in the UK, and I have, like I said, I've grown up this, I have a brother, I've seen the difference. They never used to really do the work because they thought all the girls would come to them because they're fairer skinned. It was the dark skinned guys for some reason that weren't touchable. And then until they got a bit more older, then suddenly they were flavor of the month. And I'm using very colloquial terms, but I've seen it in a different way, where actually even patriarchy is live and well. There are some elements of colorism between men and black men. And I would love to understand that experience, because like I said, I have a brother, so I've seen it from his perspective and his friends, and also, stories from my husband. So yeah, and I do think there is some nuances, probably not as predominant as from a female context, not wishing to shy away from that. But yeah, I'd be very interested to see what that experience is from a male perspective too, and how colorism shows up for them.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how, different and yet similar all our experiences are in this regard. My next question is for you, Ama. What are the unique challenges Black people face in society, and how do you think it is different from those faced by Indigenous or other people of color? And just before you continue, I think we need to speed up a little bit if we want to get through all the questions, and I really want to go through all the questions.
Okay, how challenges? I talk about this forever, I think. Some of the challenges we've already talked about, I do think it's, again, coming back to the devaluing. So there is always these deep-rooted stereotypes that have always been associated with Black people around education, again, around wealth, around privilege. So I think in society, how it shows up is, again, that, you hear my language, you hear how I speak. I've often been told I speak very well for a Black person, which I always ask, well, what does that mean? And then when they know that I'm from Africa, they're like, oh, really? And then obviously when people get to know me and find out about some of my accolades, they just look at me like, really, and I've often found that it's really challenging that it shows up in terms like education, in terms of opportunities for jobs, and predominantly because people have this, when I say people, society, especially society that is rooted in institutional racism and structural racism, when it's a system, there is this belief that the opportunities should go to more, you don't want to give opportunities to people because you're afraid of what they could become. And ultimately, when you look at it from an anti-Blackness perspective, we are Black, we are beautiful, there's nothing that we cannot do. And so I think it's one of those elements where there are lots of challenges, but also access to things. So again, it's about your network and, your network. So as Black people, if we're not attuned to, sorry, and I'm waffling a little bit, I know we have not a lot of time, but anyway, this will be my last point, but it's about access, and access is around who you know, how you know, and opportunities to get into that. And where you have systems that are created to you that you cannot access deliberately and are denied from it, you're often left with the fodder. I don't know if I've explained myself properly because I'm just conscious that I have to be quick, but ultimately these are some of the challenges, not being able to access things or knowing or having the opportunity because of privilege.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof.
So we've heard the terms whiteness, proximity to whiteness a few times today. So let's talk about white supremacy next. Mary, what does white supremacy have to do with anti-Blackness?
White supremacy is the reason why we have anti-Blackness. So that's number one. Because we wouldn't have anti-Blackness if we weren't colonized, if our people weren't enslaved, if our religions weren't taken from us, if the way we spoke to each other, the kind of communities we had, the way we did things was not taken away from us or called savage, then, it's all because of white supremacy. And the problem with white supremacy is that it is so powerful that it's not just taking our cultures, our languages, our food, and our beliefs. It's also taken our people mentally. And that's the biggest challenge. That white supremacy is we have so many people who are mentally enslaved, to put it very clearly. So many people are mentally enslaved and they don't know how to get out of it because this is the only way they know to be. If you have lived your entire life doing things one way, it's going to be very difficult for you to be convinced that this is not the right way to do things. And this is the power that white supremacy has. But the good thing is that things are changing. And regarding the mental enslavement that also Black people are, this is starting to change because we're having more conversations. We're having more solution-focused discussions about this. And we're not just leaving it to, this is how things have always been. This is how we do it. And I'm going to give an example, like even with hair. So we've always known that Black hair is not attractive. When you're a Black woman, you've always known, you've always been told, it doesn't have to come from your immediate family members, but it comes from society, that if you have Afro hair, you are not beautiful. And this is one of the reasons why I purposely came with my Afro hair, because this is not something that I never used to wear my hair naturally. I always used to straighten my hair. And a few years ago, after my twin sister decided, you know what, I'm not going to straighten my hair anymore with chemicals. If I need to straighten my hair, it's going to be, sometimes with a blow dryer or, with a flat iron, but I'm not going to use chemicals again. And I think it was 2018 or 2017 that I also decided, you know what? No, even though I'm living in a white majority country, I am still a Black person. And I should be able to not put chemicals to my hair for whatever reason. So white supremacy is at the breakfast table, it's at lunch, it's everywhere, it's in the atmosphere, it's everywhere. It's just not something you can escape. And yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that perspective, Mary. So we've already established that anti-Blackness can be perpetuated by people of any ethnicity or racial background, including within Black communities. So Chisom, how do you think anti-Blackness shows up and differs within Black communities and communities of color? For example, between South America, Africa, Europe, and North America?
I don't want to speak for entire continents, so I'm just going to speak from my own experience.
But you are from like 2 continents, so.
Absolutely, I am. Technically 3 now that I am also, I can claim that I'm a Norwegian citizen. Yes, I think that within communities of color, I think anti-Blackness shows up in terms of proximity to whiteness. I think within Black communities, it shows up, say, through colorism, right? So if we look at it from a, and this is not the only way it shows up, this is just what I'm thinking about right now. I think when we look at it from a how it shows up, say, in Black communities, I think Amma as well as Mary have talked about maybe different experiences. My perception is on just even the little nuance of like, as calling somebody a Black beauty. This is something, you know, you hear a lot. I heard a lot in Nigeria when I'm back there. So people who are quite dark skinned and as some are perceived as beautiful are called Black beauty, because apparently to be Black, you should not be beautiful. So that emphasis is made. And initially, you know, you can think of that like, oh, a compliment. But if you really look at what that compliment insinuates, it's insidious in saying people like you should not look beautiful, right? And then you also see how anti-Blackness sometimes can be internalized, where based on people's experiences from the society through layers of privilege, opportunities, they also believe that in order to be perceived as beautiful, they have to have lighter skin. And this is when we have the occurrence of skin bleaching. I think this happens in a lot of communities, continents across the world. I know it happens in India, so in some South Asian and also East Asian countries, as well as also in Africa. And men as well as women and non-binary people, for example, also they bleach their skins. So this is one way these are some ways I think it shows up. And also what is perceived as beautiful, because in Nigeria, I don't know how it is for Amma and Mary, somebody whose light skin is called yellow. They're very yellow. You know, you automatically assume like this somebody is supposed to be super beautiful. I think outside of the Black community or communities of color, you know, it shows up in terms of who the model person of color usually is. Something I noticed both on the continent and outside of it is usually the model minority, you know, brown people who have a close proximity to whiteness. They are not quite darker skin, for example. They have straighter or softer hair texture. You know, there's a lot that builds on that. And if you look at it within the workplace, the concept of model minorities, it's the people who are hired for roles. It's the people who are used to describe people of the global majority as a monolith. So look at this South Asian person, or look at this person because they are our person of color, right? So it shows up in different ways, and it's really hard to unpack all of it, but these are two things that come up for me currently.
I just wanted to really quickly add, the other way that it shows up, again, I've mentioned it, is about class. So when we're talking attaining to wealth and affluence, so Black people can't attain that unless they're doing something dodgy, either drugs or something criminal. I mean, let's talk about white collar crime. Who does the most crime in that and what workplace? So do you see what I mean? So it's, again, you can't aspire to wealth. You can't own things of luxury if you are Black. And it's showed every time in the UK when how many people get stopped in their cars because they're driving luxurious cars, if they're Black men or Black women, because they're questioning how can you afford that. So the other way outside of skin color and skin tone, which are, well, again, all very much connected, because if you were probably fairer skin in the car, you wouldn't be stopped if you were darker than you if you're dark skin. But one of the other ways I wanted to raise was very much around wealth and affluence as well, because apparently it's non-attainable. Coming back to education, you know, you can't have distinct doctors or, you know, people of intelligence.
I could just share a quick story on that. I do agree in terms of class. I think I've shared it on this session maybe a while ago, just looking at it from last summer when I was in Italy, and I was trying to shop clothes or a dress for a gala I was attending, and we went to some stores, and in one of the stores I was literally followed around, and I was there with my partner, who basically was wearing just t-shirts and regular clothes, and I was actually quite well dressed, but I was literally followed around the store. And it had a funny and happy ending, because I figured, okay, if this person was going to follow me around the store, I might as well put them to work. So I started taking clothes off the rack and giving it to them to hold on to, because I thought, well, if you're going to follow me around the store, be useful. And she was quite shocked at the experience, but couldn't do anything beyond follow me around the store. And I ended up taking even the clothes I cared to try on and the ones I didn't care to try on. So she was with me for 4 good hours. I figured, make this work out for me and for you. But it does happen. And, I made a choice. How do I want to handle this? Do I want to be pissed and let this person live rent-free in my head? Or do I actually want to, make the best out of the situation? And that was exactly what I did, much to their shock.
I'm going to use that one. I love it.
Can I add something to that? You just reminded me something that happened, I think it was 2021. This was at a shopping mall near where I live in Espoo. My sisters, I think there's me and 2 of my sisters, and one of them is physically disabled. So she was in a wheelchair. And then my sister, the nurse, was pushing it. And then we passed by a nail spa. And I thought, okay, you know what? Let me pop in and see what their prices are. Just you're in a shopping mall. This is something very natural. You see something interesting, you're curious. And when I entered the property, they were so horrified. You could tell their body language changed. They were so uncomfortable. And when I spoke to the person, she didn't want to speak to me. And I thought, oh my God. And then the natural thing for me is that I don't speak in English. So when I inquired about their services, their prices, she said she didn't speak any Finnish.
Yeah.
And then the kind of person I am.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was testing her. I knew of course I speak Finnish, but I knew this probably because of the body language and the way everyone was reacting by seeing us coming inside the shop.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not going to leave. So I said, so you don't speak any English, really? And because she was not prepared to see us, she was so shocked and nervous. She started speaking in English, very good English.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that experience. And to all of you, thank you for sharing your experiences. I think it's so important to reflect on how we are complicit in, upholding these systems and structures. So moving on to the next question, we can't have a discussion about anti-Blackness without bringing up colonization, of course. Anti-Blackness is one of the cores of colonization, and it has been present ever since. So Ama, how do you think liberation through a decolonization perspective allows to create a unique narrative that decenters whiteness?
I think it's important to have the historical context first to understand where it all came from, but not be stuck in it. So for me, especially when obviously Black History Month is celebrated in the UK in November, and using this as an example. And for a very long time, we focused on slavery, which was absolutely right, we should do. But we need to move on from that. I think coming back to my point around understanding the historical context of where it all derived from and the individual experiences from that. Ghana was colonized. We were one of the first countries to get our liberation of independence. We had some great leaders that had visionary goals and missions for us as an organization, as a country, but also as a continent. So I think it's really important to understand the historical context, to also understand how white supremacy, colonization, and everything got its hold and its hook and the root on all the things that are now practically systems for us to be able to debunk them. For us to understand that there are certain words that we can take in to make it positive, but also there's certain words that actually we should just erase from existence, in the sense of not erase from existence, but not be tolerant of to use, because I think that really heightens and hypens things. I think it's also being able to understand how we create systems that also work for us, but also how we integrate into the systems that already existed, especially for the next generation. And I'm talking very, I guess, surface at the moment, because we don't have enough time to get into the granular, but it's really important. I think we've talked about and discussed throughout those conversations where we talked about how we need to take it outside of just the white supremacy context, but make it very much around the globalization of the world. And if we're going to go by the global majority, it's understanding what does that look like in our various countries, but also in the westernized societies or the societies that we choose to have as our homes or as our stomping grounds or as our stopping points. And start also creating things for ourselves. And I often think about FUBU, for us, by us, because ultimately there are things that we need to think about how we integrate for ourselves, how we integrate as a majority, also to support each other. I think my greatest saddest point is how we as a community, and I'm speaking this from my own experiences as a Black person, and sometimes in the communities, in my own communities, that we don't shop for each other like some of the other communities do in terms of building wealth, in terms of support, but equally how we infiltrate those communities. So once we are in these senior positions in the workplace, or we do have influence, how we make sure we bring other people with us so that they also have the integration to that. How we think about the next generation and the ideas and the innovation they have to start creating things and supporting them in doing that. That is how I think we debunk it. So to wrap up, we still need to be very cognizant of what colonization was, how it came to be, how these people decided to divide up Africa and the rest of the continent, to how it stands and shares in its present day in the systems that are here: education, justice, welfare, medical, everything, and show how we show up in that way, and to actually really debunk and break the myths that are. Be the change we want to see, and don't give up because the systems are telling you right now you can't do it. And I think for me, it's not just being in the UK, but also going back home to make that change. So what does that look like as a Ghanaian person? I'm thinking now, especially as a mother, how do I go back home to make that change so that my children can have that as well?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amma. That was, it's a process. I think decolonizing our minds and how we function it's a process. So moving on, we're going to discuss anti-Blackness in the workplace in the next few questions. So this question is for any of you. Do you think there are specific challenges faced by Black people in the workplace? And how do you think these challenges can be addressed and mitigated? Who wants to take this one?
I mean, I can take it. I think just to nuance, there are challenges faced by many people. And I want to quantify. So the LGBTQ community, for example, faces challenges in the workplace. People with disabilities face challenges in the workplace. People based on their religion might also face challenges. Women face challenges. Black people face challenges. And sometimes some people, everyone I've talked about currently, the different subgroup, one person can hold all of those identities, so to say. Now, when challenges faced, maybe I kind of want to just give specific examples so we know we have concrete things to hold on to, and then to think about how do we mitigate them. So if we look at first the concept of professionality, right? What it means to be a professional, that is the basis of many workplaces, right? And oftentimes how professional you are comes from how you present, and how you maybe speak, your mannerisms, or things that you address. Now, if being professional is considered having straight hair that goes into a ponytail, having a particular body type, wearing particular clothes, like colors, which usually is like white, gray, black, boring colors. If all of that fits into what professionality and professionalism is, then it already disadvantages a lot of people. Now, on the basis of hair, I think Mary talked about her hair, right? Oftentimes, the way Black people's hair grow out of their God-given heads is not considered professional because it grows, say, in an afro, for example, right? And this can be difficult, and this is a specific challenge that Black people face, where they feel that they have to straighten their hair. I can tell you most Black women especially have problems with, or have experiences with, their hair, where they are made to feel less than or unprofessional because of how they present. Another way is tone policing, right? In terms of how I say something and how that is perceived. I could say something that somebody else says who is not Black, and they might be perceived as being passionate, whereas I'd be perceived as being aggressive. And sometimes it's really important to reflect and say, why do I think this person is being aggressive or angry, for example, which is the famous angry Black woman trope. I think there's also there's something to be said in terms of how brilliant or how intelligent you're expected to be, where when you know my credentials, then you're amazed by how, wow, you're this educated, you went to that school, you've been able to achieve this or that. So I think that's also interesting to look at it. But in terms of how it can be mitigated, I really think everything starts with a conversation, because oftentimes we hold these biases that we're not even aware that we do. So having conversations and having a safe space or a safer space in the workplace where you feel like, this has happened to me, I feel harmed by it, and I want to have a conversation so we can collectively do better. It's not saying, oh, I think you're a bad person for having done this. It's like, can we create space where we can meet and have a conversation so we can further foster a community of belonging where everyone belongs, no matter the identities they wear.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chisom, for adding that. Moving on to my next question, Mary, this one is for you. What role do you think allyship plays in combating anti-Blackness in the workplace, and how can individuals actively support their Black colleagues?
Okay, so allyship, first of all, I think anyone who wants to be an ally or considers themselves an ally has to first ask themselves, do I understand what Black people need? Do I also understand what the specific Black people in my circles or in my workplace, what they need? Because we don't all need the same things. For example, you could have one Black person in the same company who's already, who has a C-suite level kind of position. So they don't need the same things as a person who's a junior, who's just starting now. Or you could have a friend outside the company who's a student. So they probably don't need the same things. So allyship is understanding that we are not monolithic, and then understanding what we want. And the most important thing, stop tokenizing us. Don't tokenize us, don't speak for us, and don't assume that you know more about us than we do. But when you have the right kind of allyship, then you have the right kind of changes, you have the right kind of progress. And I keep saying that. I'm going to give an example of Finland, for example. We have this thing where when we have DEI panels or events, there's always going to be different kinds of people, yes. If it's not organized by Finnish people, I'm going to be very honest. So if it's not organized by Finnish people, it's organized by other people, there's going to be a bit more variety. Now, going back to how Finnish people organize, they're going to have one person of Asian origin, or they're going to have, they're not going to have a Black person. So if you are my ally and you are invited to this event, and you are continually invited to such kinds of events to speak, are you really an ally when you are so comfortable returning, going to different kinds of events? You don't see people like me, but then you call yourself an ally. You are not an ally. So allyship is understanding what we need, not according to you, but according to what we need. So we need to have more conversations with people who want to be our allies, and we need for them to understand what we need so we can actually have real change. And that's allyship. Allyship is conversation. Allyship is doing things the way that actually benefits us, that doesn't always just benefit you and put you, in a position, she knows Black people, so she's fine. No, if you're going to these events, if you're doing all these things, you are not an ally. You are only looking out for yourself. And it
Can
doesn't
I
matter
say
whether
something about allyship, actually, if I may? Mary, just add to that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've learned, well, Dr. Purnima Luthra wrote a really great book on allyship and the behaviors and practices towards allyship. So that's a really good place to start. I recommend that to anyone, and whoever is on my team, please put it on the chat so people can access it. I do think with allyship, there's also importance to recognize that people need different things. So the fact that Mary, Amma, and myself are seated here, and even you, Shantani, and in some capacity we are presented, or we present to the world, at least for the three of us, as Black women. You know, it's also important to recognize that because your Black friend said it's okay, does not necessarily mean that is okay for me. So allyship is an active state of being. It also requires that we ask each person what they need. And I think that's one of the things we need to recognize, that proximity to a person is not the same as lived experience. And people have different lived experiences, and then they have different ways in which they experience and they receive a sense of allyship. Some people want you to speak up when you see something happen to them in a public space. Other people want you to mind your business and don't say anything to them. So you have to always ask people what they need when you can. Don't ever assume that you know, so to say.
Thank you. That's such an important thing to say. Also, since you mentioned Dr. Purnima, I'll always remember her statement at DNS when she said, "If you have a brain, you have a bias." That's the truth. So thank you so much, Chisom and Mary, for adding your perspectives. And as we come to the end of this discussion, we are on the second last question. So I'm sorry if I pushed you all to answer them as quickly as possible. I wanted to cover all the questions. Second last question, and I'd like to ask you, what are some strategies or approaches that have been effective in combating anti-Blackness at an individual, institutional, and systemic level? Can you think of any examples of success stories that you can share? Amma, maybe you can go. Or anybody, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it has already been mentioned from that last question around allyship. I think at each level it's different, but it needs to start from the individual need that goes up to the collective. So what is it that individual needs and requires from you? How do you, first of all, acknowledge, understand, and listen and hear to then give that need? And if we're looking at it from, again, different contexts, it is very much, if you look at it in the workplace, some of the things that Chisom already mentioned is around the safe spaces to enable people to share their lived experience, but from that, then changing the culture. So you can't invite someone in to tell you how they're feeling or what they've experienced, and then just sit there and do nothing about it. You have to act on it and think about it tactically if we're looking at it from the workplace as to what does that look like. Looking at your policies, looking at zero tolerance, what does that look like from a spectrum of dynamics? Is it a conversation or is it straight, dismissal, whatever that looks like? Is it more around looking at your workspaces and also your workforce in itself, and how do you again think about making sure that there's more representation from an intersectional perspective there? I think from a structural piece, it's probably it will take time to debug. An example of what I'm talking about is my former job. I was head of people there, and it was working for a mental health organization, mental well-being organization, where we training to the nation to help support others. And when the issue with George Floyd happened, we decided to become, or should I say they, because I no longer work there, an anti-racist organization. And it started from the top. The CEO was like, we're not doing this anymore. We need to look at how we show up in our workspaces, but also how we deliver our training and how we support our people of color, Black people, global majority people to deliver that training and give them that space. So we did a whole audit, everything we looked at and dissected in detail. We spoke to our Black, brown, global majority instructors to find out what is it they were going through and make sure that we then made sure that they wouldn't be going through the same thing again if we could help it. We looked at our level of expertise, but in terms of what we would accept and what we wouldn't accept. And we actually did that. We ensured that all our instructors went through that. And if people weren't going to be part of that, they could leave. There was just no non-negotiables. So I think that's one example, I think, from an institutional, organizational level, where you have that change and then you keep delivering that change and having that audit, but also training and learning and continuous education. From an individual person level, as what Mary and Chisom said, it's around what does that person need? And how do you continually show up and change and evolve that person, evolve in that your support, but also your own education and your own self-awareness. I think that a lot of it stems from privilege. If you wake up, like I said before, if you wake up and look at yourself in the mirror and you have no issue of your life, where if you're going out that door, you don't have to think about your skin color. You don't have to think about, how do I get on this bus because I have 2 legs to walk on and I don't have to worry about getting in a wheelchair or being disabled, not being able to see. If you have no form where you have to worry about your identity and how you have to fit in or impact or connect with others, you're a world of privilege. And you need to then think about how that privilege manifests when you touch other people and how you then impact that way. And I think, again, from an institutional level and structural level, it's how we debunk. Perfect example, Mary talks about panels. And I know that's very light touch, but ultimately, actually, what you don't want to then do is have tokenistic panels. You need to have authenticity in everything that you do, but also in the key areas where you're talking about certain things that are mainstream. And I will talk about it, for example, from a humanitarian aspect, where we talk about aid and we look at panels from the UK right through to the Nordics, right through to international, who sits on those panels to talk about those aids. When we talk about Africa, when we talk about the Caribbean, we're talking about it from the majority, and that's a white majority. So my thing with that is changing the narrative with the voices that actually are that narrative and not experts that think that they are that narrative. So I think there's things like that where you can actually really debunk the myth around and change. It's the narrative, the voices, the people that show up in those systems and societies, come back to the access point, giving people access, people that are at senior levels, making sure that those representations are much more higher, and not because you're trying to tick a box, but you're really trying to be authentic in your leadership, in your culture, whether that's at a sub-level and elsewhere. Again, I'm touching the surface because we can go into so much more detail about this, but I think that is a starting point to start thinking about how we make and create change.
I had something to that.
Thank you.
If you want to do something, number one, you need to hire a consultant. So you're going to hire a Black person who knows what they are doing. The person who's hired in accounting or in IT in your company is not your DEI person. They're not there to be your personal library, to do everything for you. You need to go out there, find the consultants who have the time, who have the space, who can be able to tell you, what, this is going to cause harm. Because the Black person from accounting is probably the only one, or one or two. They're not always going to be able to tell you, what, this is uncomfortable, or don't do this, because they know there's always repercussions for that. So you are putting them in a position where they shouldn't be in. So hire the right people externally. If you do not have a DEI person from, of African ancestry, or who knows things to do with Black people, then hire one. Number two, how do you hire? In Finland, for example, they have a thing where if they want a person to speak about Black issues, they have to have, for example, one Finnish parent. That is not correct, because there are lots of Black people. You do not have to speak Finnish as a native language to know about what Black people experience or what Black people need. And I also see the same thing happening, for example, in the LGBTQ+IA community. When they choose people from this community, Black people, most times they may want to just choose a man, or they want to choose a man who's in a relationship with a white person. And this is wrong. People don't talk about this. I haven't had anyone talk about it, but this is something people need to stop doing that. People from any community are not monolithic, and you have to open your eyes. For example, if you want to learn about Black people, it's okay for you to go to a Somali woman who's also a Muslim, but people don't do that. So there's not only one kind of Black person, or one kind of Black person from the LGBT community. You need to find other kinds of Black people to educate you.
Yeah.
May I add, Shantani, I know you're trying to stop us from talking. But may I
I've
add?
been trying.
I think really great points, and Mary. I think in terms of strategies, I'm a huge believer of resource. You know, having resource, that's human capital as well as financial capital. Don't expect people to work for free, and also understand that it costs a lot of money. And sometimes, you know, say people from the communities that you might want to learn from, it could be, for example, the LGBTQ community, it could be women, it could be Black people like we're talking about today. Sometimes they might also charge you more because it's more labor for them. They have to come to those situations with lived experience, and that there's so much to unpack. So have resource and do your work to make sure that even in trying to effect change in your organization, that you're not doing it tokenistically, and that you're also ensuring that you're using the people who are skilled in their craft, so to say, and then you listen to them when they tell you what you need to do. I've seen situations where head of DEIs across the board, different skin colors, different genders, have been hired at workplaces, and they are telling you what they know of how to action change, and they don't feel empowered with the resources, with the support to action those changes. So do better in that sense. I think another thing is also about measurements, because it's nice to put out really great statements or run the occasional workshops here and there, but if you're not measuring the change that you are actioning, you know, people might end up feeling more harmed by that. You know, it's things like pink washing, green washing, you know, like trying to present that you're doing the work when in reality, you're not doing the work. So measure and track what you're doing. So in 6 months, you can look at it and go, am I doing well? And what can I do to improve this? And lastly, so one last thing to add here, Shantani, is about, I'm a really big believer of do not make decisions, create initiatives without the leadership of the people for whom those initiatives are meant to serve. If you are working within, if you're trying to do work within the LGBTQ community, don't come to me, go to somebody who's from that community, right? I can help in other ways because I'm a data wizard, but, you know, go to the people. And I think that's really important, that intention, being conscious of what we're doing and actioning what we preach goes a long way. All right, I'm done, Shantani.
Thank you so much, the three of you. For the last question, just very, very quickly, what are some top tips for being more inclusive of Black or Black presenting people in the workplace and society? Mary?
Use your eyes. Many of you, well, that sounds a bit ableist, so I'm sorry.
That is ableist.
if you can, because most of us judge by what we see, those of us who can see. So for example, when we see a panel, it has everyone included, but there are no Black people. If you can see, if you are able to see that there are no Black people, and this is something repetitive, then you can be able to say, I'm not going to participate in this. If you're going to sessions or if you're doing things and, you know, you're talking about human beings, and you know that certain human beings or specific communities, it doesn't even have to be Black people, you notice certain people are not there, then you just need to stop participating. It's very easy. So you just need to be able to make it a habit to speak up. Again, this sounds ableist. If you cannot speak, I don't mean literally that you have to actually, you know, but you need to speak up. You need to be able to say this is not correct, or what we are doing is not right, or what we are doing is not inclusive, but you have to say something. You don't attend or do things, even in the workplace, you know it's wrong and then go complain about it later. Do it in that moment. And that's the best way to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. Ama, you're next.
Yeah, I agree with Mary. I think we need to think about it from a humanitarian perspective. And I say to my daughters every day that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, and they are. And I think that if we're looking at it from a humanitarian perspective, we are all fearfully and wonderfully made and deserve to be in this earth for a purpose. So for me, it's very much around being self-aware. You know, challenge your biases, challenge yourself to be more self-aware every day, to think about from a humanity perspective, am I being the person I should be in a good way, if that makes sense? And I know it like sounds fluffy, but ultimately that's what it comes down to. We are all human beings and deserve to be treated as that. I think to the point around calling in and calling out, know when to call in and when to call out, know when to step in and ask somebody and stand and create the space for the individual to show up how they want to show up, or support them in that. And the only way you do that is by asking. Do not make assumptions. Do not assume. Do not, I say do not judge, but we all do it somehow, but just don't assume. Do not start by assumptions. Always ask, always be keen to learn and evolve and learn from different perspectives and different ways. Don't always go to the ways you've been doing. Look at your surroundings too. Like, who are you talking to? Where are you getting your information from? How are you educating yourself? And I know we're talking about it from the workplace, but also think about the young people. Like I say, it stems from generation to generation. And the reason why we're here having these conversations is because it's continued from generation to generation. So in order for us to stop that, we need to also start with the generations that are coming before us and are soon to be coming thereafter. So I think it starts with self. It starts with being able to influence and control your space. And you can do that. It doesn't have to be something huge or grandeur. If you're in that power of influence where you can, fine. But you can start by small things every day. And that's calling in, calling out, knowing when to invite yourself to a conversation and when not to, supporting those individuals, asking, don't jump to assumptions, challenge your biases and challenge your self-awareness really and reflect. And change your frame of reference in terms of who you have around you. Because if you're coming back with the same old same, then something is not changing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Armanda.
And something, because I know she's gonna speak a long time, but let me say this. So it's not just about using your voice. You use your voice, you use your position, use your power, use your eyes. Again, I'm not being ableist. Just use whatever you have at all times to do something about it. And I want people to start taking anti-racism seriously. This is not something you're going to have one conversation with one Black person and immediately, you know what, I'm amazing, I know about Black people. You need to invest in their education. Get the education from Black people. What is anti-Blackness? How can I stop what I'm doing? How can I be able to support people? So invest in learning, use your voice if you can speak, use your eyes if you can see, just use whatever you have, use your resources to support Black people. That's the only way you can do this.
And before you end up, but be prepared to also lose people like this. And if actually that'll be your greatest point of knowing you are changing, because if you're willing to stop interacting with the people you used to before because their values and beliefs are not on the values of humanity and on the values of support, that's when you know you are really evolving. If you're not willing to do that, then you have to question yourself as to ask, are you really here to do the work and really here to make the change?
Thank you so much,
because I know you want to say a lot.
No. I'm like, what do I say? They've said a lot. I think there's something quite beautiful about introspecting. Like, who's the person in the mirror? You know, and I think you both have hinted at it, you know, in terms, or even touched on it in terms of, what is my power? What is my privilege? What can I do? What can I action? I don't think we can always do something when it happens, because I find myself in situations where I have other tools, I have other language, I can talk for days, as you know, but something happens and I freeze and I don't know how to deal with it because I'm stunned. You know, and I think it's okay not to be discouraged by that reaction as well. It's what you do afterwards, whatever afterwards is for you, that counts. And I think that makes a huge difference. I think that, you know, one of the things I ask, I love this phrase, is everyone in the room. You know, you can't have Black people or brown people or people of the global majority or LGBTQ folk in every panel discussion. But depending on the topic and the theme, and I don't think you should ask, is everyone in the room? And to clarify what this means, you shouldn't only have Black people or queer people when you're talking about, when it's Pride Month or when it's Black History Month. Black people are leaders. Queer people are leaders. They do marketing, right? They do finance. Put them in spaces because representation matters. One of the maybe last thing I will say here, because I see Shantani is stressing out, is on a friend of mine, Astrid, talks about whataboutry. She calls it. And it's about this, you know, when I say something and my experience, somebody says, yeah, but what about this? Oh, but this person also has it hard. Like just thinking about it from an oppression Olympics perspective, it is perfectly okay to listen to people and believe them when they tell you their experience. Don't come back with the, what about my other Black friend who doesn't have this experience and blah, 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 blah. No, it's we are capable of hearing people and of listening to them and believing them when they tell us their experience, and then figure out, how can I be an ally to you here? How can I action? You know, how can I use my power, my privilege to not be a gatekeeper, to pull you into the room, to give you access, to speak up for you? Yeah, so these are some of the things that come up for me. All right, Shayan, Tanya, I'm done.
Can I say one more thing? Safety. Please think about our safety. It's very important to always think about our safety. Whether it's a conversation you're broaching in front of a group that is predominantly white or any other community, whether you're inviting us to spaces, physical spaces, always think about our safety. And this also is not an excuse to exclude us, because it's very common for people in DEI to say, you know what? We don't have any Black consultants because we're scared for their safety because we have Nazis. Well, you know what? A Nazi doesn't like women either. So you cannot say that you're not going to have any Black consultants and you're in there speaking for Black people and excluding Black people. So it's all about situation. So think about our safety, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, and also stop excluding us.
Last thing, be willing to take feedback. Right? Because you can see yourself as an anti-racist, anti-Black racism. You can see yourself as a pro-LGBTQ community, but then you might have behavior or you might do something that reflects a bias that you're not even aware of based on conditioning, as Amma has, you know, clarified to us earlier. I think it's also okay that when you were called in or out in that situation, depending on the context, that you approach that with humility. And you say, okay, this sucks. This is not who I want to be. How do I fix this? As opposed to go, oh my gosh, I'm such a good person. Why do you think I'm a racist? Do you think I hate Black people? Do you think I hate gay people? Don't go that route. Go okay, what is there for me to learn here? And then do the work. And being an ally is an active state of being. You don't say, I'm an ally, and then you get a badge and you're done. No, it's an ongoing and evolving process. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, lead with compassionate curiosity and empathy. Just stop that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for, but it's such an important topic and I wish we could like continue, but we have a few questions to get into. But also before that, like just picking up from what Chisom was saying, you know, like confront your biases, like that little thought that sometimes pops into your head and you're like, oh my God, did I really think that? Confront that and question yourself. You know, why did I think that? And it starts from questioning yourself and trying to learn and do your research. Okay, so the first question that we have here from the audience is, okay, we have a question. Okay, anti-Blackness has spread a lot of negative perceptions about Black people, such as association to criminality. Which ones do you find the most problematic and how could we debunk them, not to accommodate other people's perceptions, but to actually improve the lives of Black communities? Yes, Mary.
Well, we're just going to go with facts.
Yeah.
Black people have not gone all over the world colonizing people. So we cannot be the one taking the biggest share of we're not the biggest criminals. So we just need to face reality and the facts. Black people have not gone around the world enslaving people, colonizing people, being, you know, unhospitable to them. When you come to Africa, how do we treat you? How do we treat Europeans? How do we treat people from the Middle East? How do we treat Asians? Go with those facts. That is who we are. So then any other stereotype that doesn't match with the reality, then you just need to know, you know what? I need to speak more to Black people, and then I'm going to be able to debunk all these things. But just go with reality. All these things about us having this Black on Black crime and all this, there's a whole lot of white on white crime, white on Africans, white on Asians, white on South American crime. And I mean, millions of people have lost their lives. So when you remember about the lives that have been lost, you will know that we are not the ones who have been responsible for this. So I'm just going to go with the facts. We are not leading with crime. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think all of it is an issue. And I mentioned this before, and holding the media accountable, but also I think it's come down to where you get your sources from. Where are you finding your information? Who are you getting that from? Whether it's media outlets, friends or family, if you are smart enough or have any form of a brain, you would go and do the work yourself and actually think about whether this is true or not. You know, to hate hashtag fake news, there's a lot of fake news out there. But also when you keep pumping a certain narrative, that's what the belief is, because obviously there's a reason behind all of this. There's reasons behind where targeted stereotype groups are always the face of a Black person. When you look at media headlines, when you look at images, when they talk about I mean, this is like in the last 2-3 years, when you go to American media and you find a white boy has shot down how many innocent Black people, they want to claim it as mental illness. But when it's a Black person, the narrative is different. So I think there's a lot about holding our news outlets and media outlets accountable for the news that they share. But ultimately, for you as an individual, if you're going to sit down and consume that news without actually asking the questions, doing the work, going to find the research, and actually thinking about the conversations you have even within your social circles, then I think the issue is you. And that's my point and my perspective. That's some of the ways we need to debunk it. And as like I said, like if you look at it historically, when we even think about opioids, the biggest usage of opioids is white Caucasians in America. When we look at how things are being supplied to people and things like that, but we just don't want and whether it's sheer laziness or ignorance, call it whatever you want. If you give opportunity for the floodgates for those things to continually happen, they will continually happen. But if you challenge and read and look elsewhere for information, that narrative will slowly start to change. And that's how you debunk and change things.
Can I add something to that?
I want to add something. Okay, go on, Mary.
Let me say something to that. It's about your sources. So if you're only finding information about Black people from your TV screen, then it's always going to be negative. They're not going to be on your TV screen telling you how amazing Black people are, how amazing Africans are.
Well, unless you're playing sports, you know.
Or music.
Exactly.
That's what they're good at.
So you need to have positive representation, and it's your responsibility. You all have LinkedIn. So if you know that the news are showing you Black people are doing wrong, they're doing this, go to LinkedIn. You follow Black people, send a message, start developing friendships, start developing this kind of relationships where you see positive representation and you need to understand this community better, send a message.
May I add, I think just backing off what Amma was saying, I think it's all problematic, the question, and which one is less, it's like your right hand or your left hand, which one do you want? It's like, okay, well, but I think the problem is me. I think the problem is each and every one of us. You know, I think oftentimes we think about systems and structures as though it's like this big bad person in the sky or this politician who has power, something that we can't touch. We forget to remember that those people are people like us. And ultimately systems and structures and policies and practices are built and reinforced by people like us. I'm not better than them by sitting here and going, oh my gosh, how awful. It's like, what can I do? And how do I start actioning change from my home? So around your table, do you have friends from diverse backgrounds? When you have a party, who's there? And it's not just about having Black people, like who is there? There's so many literally different people in the world. So I like to take responsibility because I think oftentimes we wait for somebody else to do something, whereas we have in our own way power. We may not have power to affect things on a political level, but we have power over our current self, our current generation, and also power over how we raise and inform the generation coming after us. So I think we are the problem, and that's where the solutions begin.
Yeah, and I just want to add this
so
little
much.
antidote where the thing about power I think is really important, because if you think about it, I have a 13-year-old, two 13-month-year-olds who have highly influential power over me, and they don't even know it yet. So imagine what we can do, then we know, and we can make that change. And I just want to make that comparison because, like my point before, sometimes we want to think about this big thing over here that we cannot reach or change, but we actually, within our own spheres of influence, no matter how small it is, can make that change. We have to start with ourselves. I completely agree with Chisom on that one.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question we have is from Emil. What lifts you up and what provides you with safety and power in this amazing and crucial work that you do?
Oh, well, I think that's, well, it's easy, but it's, yeah, my tribe, like the people that I hold dear and close to me. And there's days where I don't want to do this. I'm going to be very honest with you. There are days where I don't want to do this. There are days where I don't want to show up on panels. There are days where I'm tired, and days where I'm fed up. And there's days where I have reevaluated whether I want to continue to do DEI. But I think for me, it's definitely my close influence of my tribe, as I hold it, my family, who are really important to me, my husband, my children, my close friends, some of which I share this panel with, and also just my faith. And we have touched on it very briefly in this conversation, but I also think that the fact that I know I'm on this earth for a purpose. And I think that there are days where when it gets too much and I do turn to my tribe, I also turn to prayer, and I turn to the fact of knowing that that I do believe in God, and I do believe there's a higher purpose, and that I am blessed and favored and all of that stuff. I say all that stuff very vividly, but it's important. It's who I am. And also there's times where when I don't want to do this, I do have the time to shut down and realize what life is about, and taking that self-care. But also knowing that I'm doing this for the next generation because I'm a mother, and I know what my parents went through and what I'm going through, and in hopes and prayers that my children in some sphere or shape or form don't have to go through half as much as we've been through, and are the greatest ancestors before us. So yeah, that's just and lots of ice cream and animation and good food also get me through this too.
Thank you, Amma. Chisom, did you want to add something?
I think everything Amma said,
Yeah.
including, I think a good cry helps me sometimes. Yeah, I think for a long time in my life, rarely crying unless like somebody died or something. And I can't tell you how much I have cried in the past couple of years. And I find it to be very therapeutic, and it's painful, but it feels like a release, so I think a good cry. But of course, like I think at the core is also my tribe. It's me crying in front of my tribe, and I'm like, I'm strong. And you're like, I love you, Chisom. And I'm so I think a good cry helps. But of course, tribe, family. And I think for me, having a reason why I continue to do anything I'm doing, it's my life depends on it. I feel like my mental well-being depends on it. My children's life, one of whom you might hear in the background cooing, depends on it as well. And the safety of my friends as well. So I'm really grateful for that tribe and that community and that space where I feel like I don't have to explain or think about how I say the thing. I can just say it.
Thank you. We have a few questions to get through, so I think I'll move on to the next one. What is our next question? Yes. The next question is, could you please give an example of how HR can proceed, I would say, in one of these scenarios? So I would say when anti-Blackness shows up.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Mary, were you going to answer that?
Yeah.
Go ahead and I'll touch on it because I spoke the last one, so I'll give the floor to you if you were going to say something.
I think we don't know what kind of organization they have. So it's are they a Black HR person? Are they not? I think I'm assuming this is a predominantly white organization, maybe, or the HR person is white. So if white people don't always know what is racist, I'm sorry to say, well, I'm not sorry. White people don't always know what is racist. And this is a reality because white people have been conditioned to minimize racism. Because for some reason, when the next person is accused of racism, they somehow attach themselves to it and they feel like they're the ones who are being excused. So their first reaction is to excuse the behavior or minimize the behavior or trying to find why it was triggered. So I think if you feel that you do not know what to do, find a consultant. I think that's the best thing to say, because if you do not have a DEI person who understands racism, and another thing I have to say, racism is not only understood by Black people, so I have to be very clear. So we're not saying that racism is only understood by us. If you do not have the person or the people who understand racism, if you are a white person, then you need help. That's the best thing I can tell you, because whatever you do might perpetuate the problem or cause more harm. So you need to understand that and find the right people to help you. That's the safest way to do this. So
I would also add, go ahead, Mary, please finish. No, please finish. I interrupted you.
No, I want someone else to come in. It's fine.
No, I mean, for someone who's worked with HR and also has led people functions, I would, and I've also worked in different industries and organizations. I agree with what Mary says. I think up until the murder of George Floyd, race was an issue that people did not want to talk about. And I think disability is also still very much the same. So they would either talk about gender always, because it's easy to do that. And even within that, they wouldn't have an intersectional lens to it. And maybe they might touch upon LGBTQI. So for me, I think it's important that now you can't go back into, you can't live in the past anymore. Now we're at a day and age where if someone has reported something, if you're looking at your employee surveys and things like harassment or prejudice and stereotypes are showing up in the way people are treated throughout the employee life cycle, and that could be from when you're not hiring enough people to when people are talking about how they're treated and work has been allocated, or you know, it comes out in your employee survey sometimes, especially if it's done anonymously. You can find the information in data. The question is whether you want to look for that information in data. And if you don't, or you don't know where to start, yes, start with the consultant. But if you actually have had whistleblowing in your organization, or people have said something of grievances, you need to look at it. And if you're not prepared to look at it from your lens of bias, because you should all know by now what bias is, you can click on Google and it'll give you lots of information on what that looks like. My point is, we're not living in a day where you cannot access knowledge, or you cannot go to the person next to you or the next differentiate, points of degrees where you can't find out the solution or what to do differently. If you are afraid to do it, then that's absolutely fine. Say you are afraid. I have a shirt that says fearless. That doesn't mean I'm not afraid. It means I embrace the fear and do it anyway. So you need to be able to accept that you are coming from a place of fear or whatever it is, but still do the work to make sure that change is coming. And you will find that in different ways. Culture has a way, your workforce has a way of telling you through the outlets you provide for them. So if they're giving you that information, if you are hemorrhaging a lot of people of color, Black people, or from whatever intersectionality in your exit interviews as well, that's telling you that the culture that you are building is toxic and not right. So do something about it. If you're afraid to, get somebody that is able to do it. And also sometimes it's good bringing an independent person is because then people are a bit more open and fair about things, and they can see it from a lens that is not skewed because they are part of the process or systems that have happened. So that's all I wanted to add to include what Mary's saying, but there are solutions.
Sorry, I just want to add something, not on the top. I think Mary and Amma, agree with them. I do think one thing I want to nuance though is that also not all Black people or people of color what's the right word? Let me be careful here. Certified or skilled enough to handle situations like this. I think because we fear, I think there's a reality that, if you have a Black HR person or a Black consultant and they're just like, yeah, I mean, this shouldn't be a problem because it's not my experience. And then that becomes a situation for everybody else. I think we need to be careful because I think the experience of racism is also different. Like you can see, for example, West Africans who, at least beyond the colonial history, have not had to interact with whiteness on a day-to-day basis. There's a difference between how a West African person might approach racism or whiteness in comparison to, say, how a South African person who's grown up in South Africa, especially with the apartheid history and also the endurance of it in some capacity to this day, approaches it. So it's also very important to say, okay, make sure you have the right person, not that HR person who's Black, who what they say is, okay, this is not racism because somebody who's Black said it. It's not. Just wanted to say that. Shantani, sorry.
Yeah, so really quickly, I know this is really, really quickly, Mary, you can jump in, but I also think that if you're not going to hire someone that identifies, because again, we have to be careful of the tokenistic positions that we put into people, put people in situations. If you're not going to hire that person that can identify with that demographic or community, so if you're hiring a non-Black person or white person to fill the role, be sure that that person also understands or is open enough and has an open mind to be open to understand the nuances of who they need to bring in to help them solve the solutions of that problem, and not be the face, because even with that, they're allies, but within that allyship, how does that person show up? Because you could ultimately detrimentally harm the situation by putting somebody who isn't or doesn't identify to solve the problem. And I actually think we do need more. We do need a mix when it comes to DEI. It shouldn't always be the Black person or the LGBT person or the disability person that comes into that role, because ultimately what we're doing is we're putting people in those positions whom we need to protect, and also might not be knowledgeable enough because they just only have experience or lived experience. But I'm not saying lived experience is not good enough, but there also needs to be that much more if you really want to influence spheres of workplaces or society. So ultimately, also, those people who are not part of that community need to do the work, and they have the biggest influence in network and sphere. So get that right person, as Chisom says, in there, but make sure that person actually is liberated and has a humanitarian perspective on what they're doing.
Can I add something to Amma said something about the science. So you could have surveys where people are saying this and that, this is wrong, this is affecting us this way. Sometimes you don't have that. In the UK, it's possible to find 2 Black people working in one organization. In Finland, we cannot say that. You probably have 1 Black person, or you don't even have, okay, let's go with that. Let's say you have 1 Black person. They've been with you for 6 years. It does not necessarily mean that they are in a safe environment. So you don't always have to check what the people are leaving or why they're leaving. A person can be in that environment and suffering. So you still need help. Whether you have people leaving or not leaving, you still need help.
Thank you so much, Amma. I think we have time for one more question. And the question is from Astrid. Very quickly then, which practitioners, experts, or thought leaders working in the DEIBJ space inspires you, and whose work has guided you the most on this specific topic? Very quickly.
Chisom. In the Nordics.
No, I'm dropping my baby, and I have a book just in front of me, coincidentally, because I did not know this question was going to come. But a few people that come to mind: Lisa Hurley. You can follow her on LinkedIn. Elizabeth Lieber. You can't see it, can you? No, it is Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. She's brilliant. Ibram Kendi wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. Janice Asara, you can find a lot of her work on Forbes. Shola, British woman who is just a badass. And most importantly, and honestly, my friends, the people who I can call when something happens that I just say something to, and they just get it. And they say, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. They don't ask me why, are you sure, where? So my friends, my tribe. Yes.
For me in the Nordics, it's Chisom. I'm going to be very honest. Chisom really inspires me. Chisom is a DEI strategist. She's doing her business. She's succeeding as a woman, as an immigrant. She's doing so many things. So she is an inspiration to me. And especially now as I'm starting my new journey as a DEI person, of course, Amma as well. You can see her credentials. I don't need to say anything. And then on a global scale, outside Europe, there's so many people who've already been listed by Chisom. There's so many people. One person I would want to mention in particular is Ashani Foucault. She's an anti-racist trainer. She's amazing. She's bold. She's going to tell you everything you, like I always say about myself, I'm going to tell you what you need so you can do better. So she's that kind of person. There's also Madison Butler as well. She's amazing. There's so many people. If you want to know the people that I admire, you simply need to go to my timeline. I'm just making it easier for you. Go to my timeline, see whose posts I'm reacting to, because they are countless. Some are professors, some are educators, some are DEI strategists, some are working in science, some are doctor, very many of them. Check my timeline. Check my reactions.
Thank you, Mary. Maybe you can also add it in the chat, some of the names you all mentioned, and I can also then add it in the follow-up email that I send with the recording. Amma, what about you?
Very similar things, people to what's been mentioned, but I also I get my, inspiration, influence from people who are not in the EDI space as well. Followers, people like, obviously, great people like Michelle Obama. I also read different books and other artists from other authors as well that actually have life experience and lived experiences from that. I've got a full list and I can send it through. There's just some of it mentioned, but also way too many to mention. And I think that's what the balance is. I think it's important to look at who's doing it in this space. Yes, definitely have a lot of love for Chisom in the short space because the reason why I'm saying this, and also Mary, is because we can be, as EDI experts or DEI, whatever you want to call us, experts, we can have expert bias. And we need to challenge ourselves to also learn from other people. So it's important for me to learn from people, not just only that are like-minded, but also very different. So I will share my list. Some of it have been mentioned. I also look, as I said, other places outside of the EDI space, but do connect, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is humanity and identities that we are. So
Can I recommend a book? Now I'm following Chisom's lead. So I recommend this book. It's called The Anti-Racist Organization, Dismantling Systemic Racism in the Workplace. And the author is Shireen Daniels. So Shireen Daniels, probably can't read this, but she's on LinkedIn as well. I would advise everyone to follow her. She has experience in HR, DEI, everything anti-racism. She's amazing. Follow her page, and also follow her company page as well. It's called HR Rewired. So this.
Thank you.
She also
so
has a
much.
podcast actually called Advancing Racial Equity 4.0, which is also a good read. So I'm dyslexic, so I don't always read books. I tend to not finish them, but I also go to other outlets like podcasts and Audible. So that's also another way of finding out more people.
Thank you for sharing so many books and all those resources. I think with that, we've come to the end of this discussion, and I have to add that I have had a blast today moderating this session with speakers who were so passionate about the topic. I really did enjoy this session, and there was so much to learn and reflect on. So thank you so much for the work that the three of you do in this sphere. And thank you for joining us today. Just quickly, our next D&I in the workplace session, we are discussing LGBTQIA inclusion. It's on June 28th. My colleague has already put the link on the chat. I can share it again. So if you want to register, please do. And
I see one of the panelists here. Emil is here. So
yes,
going to be so exciting. Emil, this is what we have to live up to next time. We have to go at each other like that. Next one. Thank you all for being here. This has been really nice.
It has been.
Loved it.
Lots to learn and reflect on. I have to go rewatch this.
Same. And
Like,
can you share, I guess, the script? I think you've recorded it, so you'll have the audio script, right? Because then it'll be really just good, just in case we have missed any questions and people want answers, and also just the links that are shared will be really good. But thank you for moderating. Sorry we didn't keep to time.
No, I mean, we did manage. We did manage. It's 3:01, so.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you taking that space to hear us out.
Thank you so much.
you.